Hello everybody, it's me. I'm back again just for a quick little video in which I tidy up and finish off Allen Ginsberg's Howl. This is where I ended it last time. I've been away for a bit, just giving you guys some time to breathe, finish up your ICE tasks, perhaps start preparing for your POE. And I've also been doing a lot of marking over the last couple of weeks as well. So this video is out a little bit later than I would like it to be, but here it is nonetheless. And we're going to finish up Allen Ginsberg. And then on Wednesday night, in a couple of days' time, we're going to start learning Unit 4, which is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. So make sure you've got that book, that you've read, for that first class, that you've read the first sort of 30, 35 pages or so. I gave you an ICE task to do as a way to introduce you to what the book is all about and what it's like. So you will be somewhat familiar before we start that final text. So finishing up this now, starting learning Unit 4 on Friday. And this is more or less where I left it with Ginsberg last time. We were talking about Howl, which, as I explained to you guys, was a poem written in the 1950s. It's a very, very long poem. Takes you a while to get through. It is quite strange, quite mind-bending and mind-melting, which is the intention. If you're worried about what it means, or if you're concerned that you don't, quote-unquote, understand it, don't panic, don't worry. I don't think it's a poem that's really meant to be understood. It doesn't have one coherent single answer or meaning or theme that you can describe it neatly with in a just so fashion. Quite the opposite. It's actually meant to be a poem that does overwhelm you, which confuses you. That's really part of its purpose. Is what you have here is a poet who's trying to, as I said to you last time, who's trying to capture the entire world and an entire generation through language. And the way he sees the world is very strange, very extreme, and very surreal or alien. And that is his main intention, I think, is to take the familiar, safe, normal world and turn it into something strange, disconcerting, or terrifying. It's his own act as a poet of rebellion or subversion. And what he's doing in the poem is describing a generation of people to which he belongs, a young people in the 1950s of America who are going against the grain, undertaking a large generational backlash against their parents and previous generations, not following the rules, in fact, breaking the rules, experimenting in their lives, and trying to forge their own new path. I think the best way to read the poem, as I said to you a couple of weeks ago, is to read it by theme. Don't try and read it line by line, analyzing the poem for some hidden meaning, kind of like we did with Blake and Maya Angelou. A close reading doesn't really get you there. I think you've kind of just got to listen to the poem on YouTube, take it in, get the tone, get the attitude that Ginsberg is working with, and try and pick up on different themes that he addresses and that he covers section by section in the poem. So what I made my students do is, I teach this as a contact module as well. I gave them a little class activity to do that's not something I could really have done with you because it requires a pen and paper and you being able to talk among yourselves and so on. It doesn't really work too well online. But I made my students do this activity, and I'm going to show you the results of the activity so that you can get a sense of what I mean. And remembering that this is a poem where he's describing what a generation are doing. The poem is structured as a kind of a list, like a catalog almost. Every line basically starts with the word who, W-H-O, who. This generation, who is doing something, who is experiencing something, or who's undertaking something, or who is having something happen to them. And there are generations spread out across America who are traveling around America, who are kind of because they're going against the system, they're also kind of living on the margins of society. And when you live on the margins of society, you have to break the rules, maybe even break the laws, do a lot of things in secret, do a lot of things off the books, live life in a kind of furtive way. If you want to live openly, strangely enough, paradoxically enough, you have to kind of do it in the shadows and do it in the dark. And that comes with consequences. You'll notice, for example, that a lot of the poem is about taking drugs, lots of alcohol, living lives kind of open sexuality, which also comes with a consequence too. And these are things that I ask my students to try and focus on in this activity, rather than trying to crack the whole poem and work out what the whole thing, quote unquote, means, rather breaking it down into sections and organizing those sections by a theme. This is another little thing we did in class where I asked ChatGPT what it thought the poem was about, and it kind of did an okay, if generic, job of telling us that it's broadly speaking, a critique of society. But you also find themes of madness and mental illness in it, along with spirituality and mysticism. So we've got a lot of drugs, we've got religion, we've got rebellion, going against the rules. And let's take a look at the fruits of this activity that I gave my students. Here were the instructions. So I called it a note card activity, and I wanted my students to focus on the words. And this is also something you can do yourself too as you read or listen to the poem. The poet is describing a generation of young people who are pursuing free lives in a restraining society. Using the theme note cards assigned to you, pick out specific words that emphasize the idea of non-conformity. So that's I would say, if the poem does have an overarching singular thing it is about, like a single golden thread that runs through the whole poem and in each and every line and word and image and idea, it would be this act of non-conformity. Conformity means to follow the rules. Non-conformity means to not follow the rules, to go strongly against the rules. So it's this act of rebellion. And just look at the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives. How does Ginsberg combine them to communicate his various themes? So I gave them all these cards. I'll show you them now, with a group name on it, as well as a range of lines I wanted them to look at, from this line to that line, usually about 20 to 25 lines worth of the poem they had to read. And then I would assign those lines and that group a theme. And across that range of lines, they had to find all the nouns, verbs, and adjectives that Ginsberg chose to use that would underpin or emphasize, create that particular theme. And by theme, I mean like a feeling, an effect. What thing is he addressing in that section of the poem? Okay. So the cards looked something like this. Well, they looked exactly like this, actually. So I would give them a note card. These are just four. There were, I think, 7 groups. These are the 4 that I decided to show you. So one group was called the Best Minds. The other was called the Rotten Animals. Then the other group was called the Platonic Conversationalists. Another, the Sinister Intelligent Editors. Those group names all came from direct quotes from the poem itself, right? Ginsberg had a very happy knack for putting odd words together in a way that created a whole new kind of sense or meaning. It just about makes sense. It has some kind of a sense to it, but he uses language and words in such an odd, strange way and in very unique combinations that it kind of resists or defies an immediate understanding. But if you kind of ponder it for a while, you can kind of see where he's going or what it means. But your interpretation of it is always very subjective and very personal, So I gave this group the best minds to start right from the beginning of the poem. I saw the best minds, and then to read all the way till the end of their section of time between. Their theme was rebellion and rejection. So to find all the words that's linked to rebellion, rejection. Rotten animals who faded out in vast, sordid movies, growing old and cried. That was their range. And they had to look at the theme of madness or mental illness. The next group had to look who were burned alive. It's here for a second, theme being religion or spirituality, and the Platonic conversationalists, peyote solidities of halls, Empire State out of the moon was their range, theme being drugs and addiction. So this is some of the themes that I personally see in the poem. Rebellion, a rejecting of the standard way of living and doing things, madness, mental illness. As I said to you, the poem feels like a stream of consciousness piece of work, like Ginsberg was just channeling his own subconscious mind and letting it all just spew out of his head. And when you hear him recite the poem, he does it very quickly and very rhythmically, as though the words are just right there and then occurring to him on the spot. But that also says something about a mental state, that his mind is not kind of a conformist, quote unquote, normal mind, but it's indulging in its own strangeness. And it can be a fine line between, like, deep introspection and taking drugs that alter your brain's chemistry. Fine line between that and, going a bit mad, being a bit kooky and not coming back from the trip, as many didn't. Religion, spirituality. The religion, as we'll see when I flip the card over now, it's not really Christianity, although America's Christian society, and certainly was back then, more strongly than now. Ginsberg was more interested in Eastern philosophy, like Buddhism and Zen. He was a meditator. You've got to understand that back then that was a very strange thing. America was not an Eastern society at all, and Ginsberg kind of helped to introduce Eastern spirituality into Western society. And Western society and Eastern thought don't really fit together. They're not a good fit. They're actually very different. But I won't belabor that. And then drugs and addiction play a big role throughout the poem as well. Drugs being, of course, illegal. So to take them means to break the law, but also the dark side of taking drugs. It's all over the poem. It's the thing I like about the poem is that it doesn't glamorize all of these things. It doesn't make a virtue out of madness, or a virtue out of taking drugs, or a virtue out of being a rebel. That can be very easily glamorized and turned into something it's not. But living in the margins of society, being relegated to the shadows, breaking laws, this is actually a very costly, unpleasant way to live. And I don't think Ginsberg really, some people think he does, but I think he really shows quite honestly how terrible that life is. Here's what my students end up writing on the back. Hopefully you can see it. I can zoom in on this thing, right? Yeah, a little bit. You can see, like, these are some of the words that pop up that my students reckoned were indicative of rebellion, like madness, angry fix, hipsters, poverty, hallucinating from drugs. That's nonconformist, these guys said. Scholars of war, a rebellion against something. Expelled equals rejection. Marijuana, rebellion. Burning their money is rebellion too. The sinister intelligent editors who were looking at religion said alive is a word which implies death or an end, so some sort of an afterlife. Iron regiments feels trapped in this world of rules. journeying, used usually in a way that like a religious text to talk about a path followed. Here by the speaker uses this journey to convey the terribly bad paths followed by the people of this generation. Golgotha was another word they saw. Religious idea of where Jesus died on the cross correlates with the idea that these people also will have to pay for their own sins at some point. So there is a Christian bit of language there of Golgotha. So my students picked up on that, but it's kind of a heterodox, like if I say there's an orthodox understanding of Christianity, which is Christianity has this meaning and this is how you should follow it. Ginsberg has a more heterodox or unorthodox view of religion, which is that religion isn't something that should be an authority over us. It's something we use for our own personal enlightenment, our own personal salvation, right? So it's an individual thing. It's not a institutional thing. Kind of like Blake. Blake was the same. 72, 3 days links to Jesus having died and risen on the third day. So there's another bit of religion in there. Salvation, juxtaposing this with the idea of human desire, shows speakers non-conforming ideas. So salvation is like personal, and it's linked to his desires more than, say, the Christian morality. Then these guys had to look at madness, mental illness, hungover, suicidal dramas, bad music, atheist use of imagination, darkness, cooked rotten animals, stanzas of gibberish. And I think that also gives you a sense of Ginsberg's language, is that he puts strange words together. They don't immediately make sense because he doesn't really care to make conventional sense. He wants to make sense at a different level or a deeper, maybe more subconscious level. And then the last one was to do with addiction and drugs, wine, drunkenness, tea head. I don't know what a tea head is exactly. An ash, I think it says ash can, like an ash can, like a bin, but also where you might put your cigarette in. Battery, not sure why they picked the word battery. Benzodrine, that's a good pickup, as well as crack, like cocaine. But benzodrine are uppers. They are things used to basically make you go. I think benzos come in two forms. Like they can make you go up, and they can make you go down. I think the amphetamines one makes you like almost hyper. They increase your energy, increase your focus, and kind of make you go a bit. If you take it in too much concentration, too high dosage, you will go a little bit mad. And that's actually in a lot of our current quote unquote medicines these days. You can actually get benzodrine prescribed to you. I think in the most used form is the form of Adderall, which is like a focusing medicine you can take. I've never taken it myself, and I don't think I will. I don't think I'll have a good time with that. So that was the activity I made my students do. There were other contributions too, but I think what you can take from this is like when you read the poem back yourself, is to look at it by theme. Say, well, one of Ginsberg's themes is religion. So let me just scour the poem looking for religious imagery. There's some Christianity, there's also some Eastern stuff in there if you look closely enough. So how does he refer to it? And what is happening in the part where he refers to it? What are people doing in that section? What is he talking about? What words does he use and put together? What vocab or diction does he write it in? Is that section quite dark, or is it a little bit more humorous? Sometimes he will be funnier than he will in other sections. Or if you think another thing Ginsberg talks about a lot is taking drugs. Well, where do I see drugs mentioned? So instead of trying to, understand the whole poem line by line, take it section by section and read it in theme rather than trying to work out what he means in a close reading, because that's not really going to suit you. And I think his intention was to make you try and understand the vastness of this generation and of the world too. Just the scope, the size, the complexity, and all of the extremities in the world. And it's not something you can just take in easily. It's going to feel like something is a whole lot of like a wave is just crashing over you. And if you think you can catch each drop individually, then you're going to fail to appreciate the wave. You've got to kind of let the whole thing just wash over you and see it in context. And the easiest way I think to achieve context in this poem is by breaking it down into themes, like I said, and viewing the poem through the lens of a specific theme. So when you're writing a response to the poem and your POE, think of it in those terms. Okay, and I think you will be a bit better off. Okay, so that will be poetry done for the semester, and we will now move on Wednesday to tackle the last text, the novel Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. Make sure you've just read the first 30 to 35 pages so that you can have a sense what the book is like, and my lecture will depend on your having some of that knowledge. Okay, guys, I will see you again pretty soon. Until then, do stay well, and see you on Wednesday evening.